Hi, Ganesh.
So now we have all the speakers in this room, and we shall now start accepting the participants. We have Surbhi and Manisha in this room who are ISL interpreters.
Hi, Surbhi. Hi, Manisha.
Hi, thank you for having us.
It's the time, I think. It's now the time. So I am admitting all of the participants now in this who were in the waiting room.
Yeah.
So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on disabilities, accessibility, and inclusion. I think we have been able to start this webinar just on time. So the webinar on disabilities, accessibility, and inclusion, a very important topic for everyone. Yes, so we have a few more people who are in the waiting room. Let's add them as well. Let's start with welcoming our esteemed speakers on this panel. We have Group Captain Prabal Malakar sir, an Air Force veteran who, by dint of being a test pilot, has flown a variety of fighter and transport aircraft, the last being the Trisonic MiG-25. His flying career came to an end when he was diagnosed with primary progressive multiple sclerosis in August 1998. We welcome you, sir, on the panel. We have Sangeeta Robinson. She has been spearheading accessibility and accessible entertainment in India for people with disabilities at PVR Cinemas. In her career spanning 2.5 decades, she has led communications, sustainability, and inclusion functions at Tata Power, DDL, Cummins, Tata Tele, IBM, and PVR Cinemas. We welcome you, ma'am, on the panel. Next, we have Nipun Malhotra, co-founder and CEO of the Nipman Foundation. He is a visiting research fellow at World Enabled, a Pineda Foundation initiative. He is the founder chair of FICCI D&I Working Group on empowering persons with disability, a member of the CII National Committee on Special Abilities that promotes inclusion of persons with disabilities in the corporate sector, and is on the board of directors at Vishwas, a non-profit working on disability and development. Mr. Malhotra is the executive director of Nipman Fastener Industries, a leading automotive fastener manufacturing company in India. We welcome you, sir, on the panel. Next, we have Ms. Sharma Durrani. Sharma ma'am is the founder of Enable RS, an accessible solutions company founded by a team of disabled individuals. She is an inclusion and accessibility advisor. We welcome you, ma'am, on this panel. Now, next, I take some time to welcome all of you, the lovely participants in this webinar room. And now, without doing much delay, I now invite Ms. Sangeeta Robinson as the moderator of today's webinar to take over with the rest of the session from here. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah. Thanks, Anish, and welcome to all participants attending this webinar. We already have about 35 participants, and the number is growing, and it gives me great pleasure that to be able to welcome you all. We are happy to inform you that we also have 2 sign language interpreters who will be interpreting whatever is being said for people with hearing disabilities, so that we are totally inclusive. We have a totally inclusive event. My thanks go out to Danish Khan and the team at Learning Guru for making this happen. At the end of this webinar, we will also be unveiling a recently published accessibility report that assesses 266 Indian websites. So there's a lot that you can look forward to. Today's panel is a very diverse and interesting mix, and Danish has already introduced them. And I look forward to be in conversation with them over the next 60 minutes or so. Without losing much time, I would like to invite Nipun Malhotra, our first speaker. Nipun, you've been very active on the disability activism space with the government, with corporates, with industry bodies. And you have also traversed the era before the RPWD Act came into being. How has the ecosystem, you think, evolved, and what are the main inhibitors towards inclusive growth and progress for people with disabilities?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sangeeta. Thank you so much, Danish, for doing this at My Learning Guru. I think that is a very important question. And to be very honest, when somebody asks how has the country changed when it comes to persons with disabilities, I really think that the glass is both half full and half empty based on how you're looking at it. I remember, for example, when I was growing up, it was a challenge to get into school itself. It's not that it's not a challenge anymore, but at least one has a protection child with a disability. When I was growing up, even the PWD Act, the 1995 Act, had not come in. So for around 50 years after independence, there was no legal recognition of persons with disabilities in that sense. I remember that was also the era where shopping malls, etc., used to not exist. The internet used to not exist. So even say going out to a restaurant for a meal was almost like an excursion because you did not know what is accessible, what is not accessible. I remember as a child when I used to love reading books, but I used to rely totally on my mother's choice on what to read because I could never enter a bookshop. Today, technology has changed life for a lot of persons with disabilities through things like Amazon, etc. At the same time, of course, there are a lot of challenges that still continue for persons with disabilities. Firstly, of course, it's been close to 5 years now since the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016 was enacted in that sense, but a lot of state governments are grossly violating the RPWD Act, including in places like the Indian capital, the National Capital Territory of Delhi. 2 years back, for example, the Delhi government decided to buy 2,000 buses, and to the shock of many people who might be attending here, the Delhi government actually decided to buy buses that were not accessible. They decided to buy standard floor buses that is a total violation of the RPWD Act, and actually had to go to court to file a PI to ensure that the Delhi government buys buses that are accessible. Sorry, what's happening? Oh, my video spotlighted. Sorry. Yeah. Apart from that, there are plenty other challenges too. Whenever a government document, for example, comes out, disability is not really looked after. You mentioned that there are sign language interpreters here for the deaf, but today we are living in the times of COVID. How many government announcements have really been interpreted by sign language interpreters for the deaf in that sense? The Advocacy app is something which is mandatory for people to step out, but when it first came out, it was not even accessible to the blind. So I think these kind of challenges are tremendous in that sense, and a lot needs to be done. Just having an act does not really solve problems. I'm going to make one last point in this question, and then of course you can ask me anything else. But for example, the act says that every building has to be accessible. But how does a building become accessible if the building bylaws ensure that accessibility is put into them? Not a single state government in India, irrespective of which political party is in power, has actually amended the building bylaws to support the RPWD Act. So a lot of consolidation is also required in that sense, which is lacking in that sense. Even during the lockdown, the central government actually came up with a proposed amendment to the RPWD Act, where they said that all discrimination against persons with disabilities should be decriminalized because it is against private investment to have criminal offenses for discrimination of persons with disabilities. That itself was shocking because CII, which is the apex body that came up with a list of laws that need to be decriminalized, did not even include this law in that sense. So I think disability, unfortunately, in India is that easy target in that sense, which is always used to make up the numbers when it's so that you can say that हमने 30 law decriminalize कर दिए या 35 law decriminalize कर दिए, but unfortunately at a holistic level disability is never really looked at. You're muted, Sangeeta.
You spoke about CII, and I know that you're on both the committees for FICCI as well as CII. What is the because there's a difference between saying and doing, and as far as recruiting people with disabilities, also there are a lot of conscious and unconscious biases that one comes across. So what to your mind has been the response on both these forums when you have brought up issues that are faced by people with disabilities when it comes to hiring and recruitment, for instance?
Just a clarification. I am chairing the FICCI committee right now, and I have been on the CI committee in the past. I think there was a line from some old profile
Okay.
that said, yeah.
So
I just want to be
nevertheless, experiences on because
yeah. But
what,
I think that is a very good point, And in fact, my foundation also runs our own award called the Equal Opportunity Award, where we actually look at companies that are employing people with disabilities and doing various innovations. And PVR, in fact, with because of Sangeeta's leadership, there has actually been a winner of the award for the innovations they were brought in making theaters accessible in that sense. So hats off to people like Sangeeta who are leading the way in corporate India. So I would like to separate companies into two kinds of companies. One are companies that are doing a lot of work for persons with disabilities in that sense, whether it's in terms of employment. The IT sector and the hospitality sector, for example, are two sectors that have done tremendous work when it comes to employing persons with disabilities. And that is wonderful because we need to do as much as we can to employ persons with disabilities in that sense. Apart from that, there are lots of other companies that are coming up with interesting innovations to ensure that persons with disabilities and the elderly are customers to them. PVR, for example, is one of them, which PVR made a conscious effort to make the theaters accessible to persons with disabilities. And I'm sure there is a business case in doing that. But at the same time, there are also a lot of companies that are really doing nothing in terms of disability, and there is also lack of empathy for persons with disabilities across HR of organizations. The Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016, by the way, mandates that companies need to have an equal opportunity policy. But I'm sure to the shock of many here, there are even a lot of PSUs that have not really developed an equal opportunity policy, despite the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016 mandating it. One of the reasons for that is that if you do not have a POSH policy, the government will come down strictly at you, and will ensure that it is enforced. With the RPW Act, it promises a lot of things, but enforcement has been very weak in that sense. But when you're talking to corporates, you also need corporates to realize that there is a business case for hiring persons with disabilities. It has been proven that firstly, there is lower attrition when you hire persons with disabilities. I'm not sure whether that is good or bad for a person with a disability, because that also shows that persons with disabilities have fewer opportunities. But that clearly means that when you're looking at it from a corporate perspective, you're going to get a bigger ROI if you hire a person with a disability, because he or she is likely to stick around. Secondly, employee morale does increase when you have persons with disabilities. This has been proved through researchers, not just in India, but all over the world. And thirdly, there's also a big sense of feeling amongst customers that they're working with, they are being associated with a company that has a larger purpose than just profit when that company has persons with disabilities. And I think a lot of companies in the hospitality industry have really milked that very well. And that is good for the company and for persons with disabilities in that sense. I think there are a lot of other industries that need to catch up in that sense and learn from them.
Thanks, Nipun. I will once again announce that there are sign language interpreters and for people who are hearing impaired, and I hope that is facilitating people who cannot hear. I will now move on to Group Captain Malhotra. Group Captain Malhotra, tell us how the harmonized guidelines, which you have very keenly and very have in-depth knowledge of, how can municipalities, state governments, organizations make best use of the harmonized guidelines? I've personally found a lot of constraints when it comes to existing buildings. So, and at least in our case, what we found was that every little iteration that was to be made needed a renewed approval of the plan. So tell us, please shed some light on what your experiences have been on advising companies and organizations and infrastructural facilities to follow the harmonized guidelines, and please enlighten us on the features.
Before I start, I would like to show a short presentation which will cover the major aspects, salient features of the harmonized guidelines. I would like to share the screen and then talk about it so that everybody is in the correct. I would request the host to allow me to share my screen. I see I cannot. Host disabled participants from screen sharing. Can I?
Yes. So thank you so much, sir. You can share your screen by this share screen option available at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Now it's functional.
Thank you.
I'll just go a couple of salient features as Nipun has correctly stated. In spite of all the rules, regulations, implementation is a weak area, and maybe people are not being taken to task or they're not being sensitized. Basically, harmonized guidelines, as put in the slide, were issued on February 6, 2016 by the Government of India, Ministry of Urban Development. It actually consolidates the National Building Construction Code, the earlier 1995 Act. Actually, this is still based on the 1995 Act, and the CPWD Act. Now, the rights of persons with disability rules, to give you the correct perspective, which was promulgated on 15th of June 2017. Chapter 6 deals with accessibility. And what is mandated by that chapter is that each establishment shall comply with standards for public buildings as specified in the harmonized guidelines. These guidelines stipulate design and specification of physical environment. So it's very clear if you go through the harmonized guidelines, what is to be done. All the specs are given there. To allow equitable access to persons with disabilities and the elderly, thereby allowing full participation in economic, in terms of employment, social, recreational, that is theaters, movie halls, restaurants, and cultural activities. While going on, before if you go through the harmonized, there's a very lengthy document. So I'll just cover some salient features in terms of why am I showing this manual wheelchair specifications. Basically, each wheelchair is standardized, and the harmonized guidelines are built around these specifications. For example, footrest extension. When you go to a restaurant or if you access the wash basin, how far can you go inside with your wheelchair? It shouldn't happen that food falls in your lap. I had this instance. I used to be a consultant in Enable Travel, where I was doing accessory audit in major hotels, and I went to Umid Bhavan Palace Hotel in Jodhpur, one of the premier hotels in India. So they requested me, sir, why don't you have lunch with us? I won't have lunch because I got another engagement. But let me have a look where I can sit. So they did not have a single table where my wheelchair could go in, because the whole of stuff below the table in terms of the table legs, etc. It's not designed for a wheelchair. And I told them that if you are a premier hotel where people come from all over, and if you're going to take a person from table to table, not knowing which table can that person sit on, there are two aspects of the table. One is to go into the table, and second, the table should be at the correct height, so your wheelchair goes in. I said half of my food will be in my lap. That also goes for wash basins in the rooms. The wash basin should be designed such that you can go right in. Seat height. Seat height is relevant in terms of transferring from the wheelchair to any other fixed, like the bed or the seat. So if those are widely differing, there'll be a problem of transferring. Armrest height also in terms of accessing below any sort of furniture. Yeah, lap height again is how much can you go into the table. Average sitting height will relate to, can you look into the mirror, can you reach for the switches, etc. So everything has been developed around that. It's a very comprehensive document. Unfortunately, I feel that it's not been disseminated to people. It is a mandatory document that is also been recommended by the rules. Now, what I would like to, I've covered that part of it, and I'll show you some photograph thereafter. But my point is incumbent on us as users to bring all infringements of this law to the authority, the stakeholders. In this case, what I do, and Sangeeta will pay me out on this, when I had some issues on PVR, because I go there, and in fact, I suggested PVR long time back that certain halls are accessible, like Audi 6 and Select City Walk, it has to go to. But somehow, at that time, of course, maybe she was not there, but they did not give much cognizance because the act was not there. But what I do is to bring it to notice of the stakeholder, current stakeholder, before taking it up to the authority. It's very easy to take it to the authority, but I give an opportunity to the person who's dealing with it to respond and rectify. So in any case, that should be a mode for everybody. Like, for example, we had accessory conference, Mr. Hardeep Puri, who was the Minister of Urban Development, told us that there was an instance of the walkway near the ITO where the lift was not accessible because something was blocking it. And somebody sent him a photo on Twitter or Instagram, and then he realized that, yes, there's a problem. But what his issue was that we give the instructions, but we don't know. How can we see that somebody is implementing at the lower end if people are supposed to implement? And so it's incumbent on us to bring it to the notice of authorities. Only in that way can we improve the system. Like Nipun has done tremendous work, pioneering work in PILs and the past case and things like that. But each one of us in a small way approach the authorities, approach the central and state commissioners for disabilities, who are the grievance redressal mechanisms. And in fact, before that also I preempted all this, and I also took it also accessible movie halls and restaurants with Mr. Daryal, who was the state commissioner in Delhi. And he did send out notices to everyone. And things slowly happen. It takes time. But it's refinement as us as users to refine the whole thing. Then it's also tagging of stakeholders on social media like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, an effective method of dissemination of complaints. People start reacting with everybody on social media nowadays. Though I am not very fluent with all these, but I have seen that if I did this, I had a problem with it. Indigo at one time, and I put it on Twitter, and straight away they can't get back to you. Then all public buildings and all open public are to be conformed to the guidelines by 15 June 2022. That's what the government says, but let's see how it's implemented. I'll show you some photographs, which, giving you some vivid examples. There's certain accessible bus stops in Delhi, near the Jawaharlal Nehru Stadium. These were made accessible primarily due to the Commonwealth Games when India was hosting the Commonwealth Games, and the Commonwealth Games Committee had said that if the infrastructure is not accessible, we will not hold the games here. So they did make some improvements in that particular area. But that is one. If you go now, most of the other bus stops in Delhi are inaccessible. They have got beautiful on the top the accessible sign. But here I'm showing you one of the examples. On one side, you see the tactile dot. This thing are stopping abruptly. It may not be in the correct design. Simply, on the other side, if you want to access, the ramp is in quite a shabby state. There's a big stone on one side and there's a pole on the other side. Of course, if you manage to negotiate all this and go up, you find big signboard advertising something. So the whole purpose and spirit of the act is defeated. The Delhi metro station is very accessible thanks to Mr. Sridharan. He's implemented a number of measures which makes the metro accessible. But here I find for the blind there may be an issue in the tactile, the positioning of the tactile tiles. Is ending abruptly. I'm not an expert for the blind, but it looks that there's something missed there. Then we have banks. Most of the banks in Delhi and all over the country are accessible so as to the ATMs. So this is all being lip service to the act, the harmless guidelines are there, whether they've got it or not. So we can take them to task. They cannot say ignorance is not an excuse. So you find an SDFC bank where you have to climb up, so there's no person in a wheelchair, there's no opportunity for him to go up. But you have another bank in the same area which has got a ramp, and where you can go and access the bank as well as the ATM. Examples of accessible toilets. Now, I was whenever I go around Delhi and all that, I always, if I can't go to the accessible toilet, people say it's accessible, but that's more of lip service. I asked my driver to go and take a photograph. I try to go it myself so that, as a public person, I can see whether it's really accessible or not. And I found this particular toilet in front of Indian International Center, public toilet. The NMC has got a number of public toilets which are accessible. Some of them are okay, some of them not so good. But this was pretty good. But then we have another poorly designed public toilet, this is in a mall, where you find that there's no grab rails on the other side. Grab rail on one side is very difficult for a person with a disability to transfer onto this spot because there's not enough space on one side. And there are no grab rails which are retractable grab rails. You can come down and assist that person. Though the facility is big enough to have all these things, it's only designed poorly. And if you look in the rear corner, you'll find a dustbin with a foot pedal. Now, how will a person with disability in a wheelchair operate a dustbin with the foot pedal? So these are small little things which a normal person may not realize, but a person who's disabled does that audit. He gives that input. I've given inputs to a number of people and also shared with them these harmonized guidelines. Now, there's some examples of an accessible toilet, a nicely accessible toilet. This is, of course, more hotel room, but basically you find the shower seat and hand shower, and the WC has got retractable grab rails on either side. If you want to transfer, you can go to the left of the WC and transfer yourself. The wash basin is at the correct height, so you can go in, you can reach for all the taps, etc., and you can see yourself in the mirror. In fact, I went to Taj Bombay and I went to one of the disabled toilets, and I found that I couldn't see myself in the mirror. So I told him that you have a disabled toilet. How do you expect a person to utilize it when the mirror is so high? The guy started laughing. He was, "मैं तो देख सकता अपने को." I said, "You're standing, man. I'm sitting." Can I look into this thing? There was another very another incident which we had gone to the railway station and there was access. There was a handicap access, but it was locked. So the guard told my wife that, "No, madam, ये कोई तो safe है. आप climb करके चल जाइए. ऐसे वो कैसा climb करके जाएंगे?" तो मैं आपको बोलता हूँ, मैं आपका दोनों टांग तोड़ देता हूँ. आप चढ़ सकिए? तो मैडम क्या बात कर रही हो? So they're not sensitized. So we have to bring it out in very terms to sensitize the people. The main thing, everybody has to get sensitized, and that will take a long time because that's a civic duty. It should be a part and parcel of your school curriculum. You see that the developed countries, they give you that much respect. Of course, they don't have that kind of population, the problem we have. But that's it. That's all from my side. Any questions, I'll answer later.
Thanks, Group Captain Malakar. And what I'm gathering from these discussions is that, because unlike Europe and other unlike the developed world, where infrastructure was designed with inclusion in mind, in India, because, we put things together and now we suddenly realize that a lot is not accessible. So I think it has to be a collaborative movement, and suggestions from people like you, Sharma, Nipun, and others always are welcome. I don't know how receptive organizations and facilities are going to be, but I think if we go on highlighting issues that prevail, we will be able to improve things. Sharma, your organization creates accessible solution for public spaces, including travel. In fact, when we met, it was travel, and now you've expanded your purview to creating accessible solutions. What has your experience been with handling the needs of people with special needs? And why don't you give us some interesting findings of how you have experienced executing solutions for various industries and companies. We look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, thanks, Sangeeta. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. It's really lovely to see 64 people in the room, of which, of course, we are about 5 or 6 of us. And so welcome to this really nice and knowledgeable webinar. Sangeeta, I'll talk about my experience as I go on. But, I was lucky to have been born into a family where disability was just a word, I was never treated like that. Having said that, I did experience, people going, poor thing, that kind of thing growing up. I went to a regular school, so I had no problems there. I had friends, I did everything. Luckily, because I came from an affluent family, I had people to help me, and accessibility was not a problem, wherever I went. But my eyes opened up when I moved to England in the 90s, and I stayed there for 10 years. And I saw how well accepted the disabled were over there. It was like a sense of pride for the government to look after their disabled citizens and provide whatever they could for them. So whether it was through aids or whether it was through money, support, everything. And I just thought, gosh, it's so simple to make life accessible. So when I came back to India, the topmost need or want of the hour was to make, the disabled citizens of India also as accessible as possible. And I was lucky because I was approached by Enable Travel. So not only was I doing accessible travel, I was also going and, moderating hotels and rooms and destinations and everything. So I had a really, a gamut of things to do for the community. Once that ended, well, it ended very sadly, but then that's history. So my colleague Rustam Irani and I, we, launched Enable R Us. So it's Enable R and US, not Enable RS. All right. So we launched that, and through that we have started doing a lot of, collaborative work for the disabled community. Like we want to, my dream is to make everything that an able-bodied person thinks and takes as regular in their life. I want to make that accessible for anyone who can't, make it to certain, like be it the stadium to watch cricket, or whether they want to go swimming, or whether they want to go to the gym, whether it's the workplace. I think the workplace is most important. So I'm hoping that if there are any corporates or any people who have and run their own companies who are interested in taking on, people, PWDs, I'd really like you to reach out to Rustam and me so we can help you make your workplace accessible. So it's my dream to make India accessible, like on every level. Adaptations, Indian style is what I always dream about, so we don't have to go abroad to get, things done. We can get them made indigenously over here. as we all know, the disabled movement all over the world in the West started with a community of citizens. It didn't come from the government because the government were as lackadaisical as our government is, not because they don't want to do it, but it's because there's ignorance. There's ignorance on every level. So with that in mind, we've also started a new initiative called VIP, Viklang Independent Party. You know, through that party, we have a community now which is growing in numbers. Everyone who's joined that community is serious about making India accessible, you know. So I'm hoping to see a lot more able-bodied people, you know, to come in and join the VIP movement so that we can take it even further. We want to take it and reach the sky. We want to make IPL whenever it's allowed back in our country, you know, once COVID is gone. You know, I want to go and watch the IPL from Wankhede Stadium. So if, you know, if anyone from the Ambani family or the Ambani, you know, group of offices and industries is watching, please come and contact me because I really want that to happen. So do all of us in VIP, you know. So it's the citizens who are going to make things possible, not the government. The initial shout out will have to be with the citizens. Unfortunately, everyone is doing it in a very individualistic way. You know, it's all about I do this and I do that. It shouldn't be that. It should be a we. We should all get together and make India accessible. And that's my dream. So Sangeeta, you asked me a question about what I felt when I was doing what I was, you know, when I was working with Enabled Travel. Everything is done piecemeal, you know. Yeah, our hotel is accessible. So you go there and it's not accessible. There are no grab rails in the bathroom, and actually the bathroom is the most important place for a disabled person. Like each disability has its own requirements. Like I'm on a wheelchair, I'm a wheelchair user. So my requirements most importantly are the bathroom, having grab rails on both sides of the WC, a shower enclosure where, you know, it's easy for my chair to go in and, you know, transfer. And the beds, they say our hotel is accessible. Now beds are supposed to be around 20 inches, 18 to 20 inches is what it's supposed to be, but it's never that. I remember I went to one hotel and literally, I mean, this is for the launch of Enabled Travel in Delhi. I literally slept on my chair, you know, I kind of just laid back and slept. It was just a question of one night. Because the first night when I sat on the bed, I couldn't get up. It just kind of collapsed, you know. So it has to be done properly and the government needs to get involved. But before that, all organizations of disability, whether it's deaf, blind, you know, physically disabled, let's all get together. Let's all get together and form a conglomerate which will make everyone in India, you know, a regular able-bodied person, because all you need is aids to be able to live a more regular kind of life. You know, you don't need to have the world, you don't have to have operations and stuff, you just need to have support, and that is what we want to provide for you. So let's join hands and make this a possibility. Thank you. Sangeeta, is there anything else you want to ask?
Thanks, Sharma. I think what we will do now is we will gradually, I mean, what we'll do is we'll finish with all the speakers, and then I think we'll open the floor to for questions. And I can see that the audience, the people who are on the webinar are pretty keen to ask questions. So, so I will, I think, quickly just take my piece, and then we will open the floor for questions. So basically, what I've done in PVR is still work in progress. And in the first phase, what I did was we looked at cinemas that were already accessible and those that needed a little bit of work, maybe a temporary ramp and so on and so forth. And we made phase one happen with the help of these minor modifications. Phase two looked more challenging because these were cinemas that had steps on both sides. So in fact, phase two got delayed because of the pandemic, and I still have 32 stair lifts that are lying in the warehouse of the vendor, and we have not been able to do the next 32. Having said that, in the first phase, we realized also that there's a large hearing impaired community which is extremely keen on movies, and not all so the problem was not just on the cinema side, but it was also there on the content side. And as a result, we worked on at least creating at least making subtitle films accessible, because what we realized was, since not all films come with subtitles, at least let's make it known far and wide that the ones that are accessible. And we mandated that at least all the prominent cinemas should be able to show at least one show with subtitles. The problem with showing all shows with subtitles was that a lot of keen movie buffs who don't like subtitles. When it came to the visually impaired, I know that in Europe, so we first surveyed a lot of equipment, we surveyed a lot of technology that is being used world over. But what we realized was that we have a content issue. And the content issue being there are no films with audio description. So Saksham, the NGO, had been doing audio description for some time, and they'd been doing special shows. However, what we did was I came across this person who developed an app, a mobile-based app called Excel Cinema. And there, between then and now, there have been about 7 or 8 films that came with audio description for films. I'll just share my screen to give you just a second. I think, okay. Am I, okay, here it is.
Yes, ma'am. Would you like us to help you?
Has it been has it been shared? I clicked on it.
Once you click on it, you have to click on the share button once again, ma'am. There's a blue share button on this.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Yeah, yes, it's accessible now.
Okay. So that's the Movies for All inclusive entertainment slide. And so 50 cinemas were done in phase one. Another 50 have been planned for phase two, which is like I said, awaiting things to normalize. As far as visually impaired were concerned, limitation on content, but we are using the app, which gives the power in the hand of the consumer. Enabling hearing impaired to enjoy films with subtitles. So at least one show started getting screened on all prominent movie theaters. This is what has been planned for the next phase, so we are still, this is still yet to be implemented. What we did on the policy advocacy side, and that was where Nipun played a very active role, and that's why I keep saying that things need to be done collaboratively, is where we started making a lot of noise on the fact that the films themselves are not accessible. So whether or not we want access, we will not be able to achieve it, because when the content is not accessible, we will not be able to screen those films. And what we saw was that repeated requests to movie producers did not really cut any ice. So we had repeated visits. Nipun filed an a PIL. We met Prakash Javadekar twice over. And finally, in October last year, there was a communication that has gone out to the Producers Association of India, asking them to make films with audio description. Having said that, that's one formal communication that's gone, but nothing really has happened. I would imagine that we would, once the pandemic is over and movies come back, we will push for more. And we will again ask Nipun to use his good offices, and we will again knock at the doors of the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting till this becomes a mandate. And since since the pandemic happened and movies shut, I had to do something. And with the help of a couple of youngsters who were interning with me with my consulting company, which works on all sustainability solutions, it's called Enduring Value. So we assessed 266 websites as per the guidelines that have been set globally for web communication accessibility rules. And these 266 comprised 103 Indian universities, top 100 as per the UniRank 2020 ranking, top 100 NSE listed companies as per market cap as on 31st March, I'm sorry, I missed the age. 3 industry bodies, FICCI, CII, and ASSOCHAM, I think, and 60 government departments and ministries. So basically what we assessed them against was for the visually impaired, accessibility to screen reading softwares. For people with low vision, ability to be able to increase font size. For people with color blindness, the contrast, the background and the font contrast. There are universal guidelines that prescribe what the correct contrast is. For people with limited use of hands and fingers that result in difficulties in using the keyboard and the mouse, it's called #no mouse, and that means that with limited number of keys, a person should be able to navigate through the website. So these were the four main criteria that we assessed each website against, and this is what we found. Despite education having gone online, 18% universities were accessible, and we being extremely generous, because among 266 websites, there was only one website which was totally accessible, and that was the website of the Ministry of Electronics and Telecommunications, MIT. Just so, okay, so I should have been on, I will share the link of this report. It is there on the Enduring Value website, and if I do, yeah, okay. So here is where, unfortunately, I think I am not able to find the, my access is not, so Enduring, we can share the link with you later. I wanted to show it to you right here, but I can't seem to access it right now. Out of the 100 universities, 103 universities, 27 were found to be partially accessible, and a whopping 55% were inaccessible. Thapar University of Engineering and Technology, Patiala fared the best among the universities. Among corporates, 30% were found to be accessible. And when I say accessible, I'm saying actually this was partly accessible, but since you know, we tried to be as generous as possible when it came to putting these in these various buckets. 23% partially accessible, 47% inaccessible. State Bank of India is the most accessible. Now, what has happened is that the government had mandated quite some time back for government websites to be made accessible, which is why I find that State Bank of India is the most accessible corporate website. Similarly, when you come to government departments, most government departments websites, you will see the accessibility signs on the top, and you will see the ability to be able to increase the font size, change contrast, and so on and so forth. But when you actually do both a manual check as well as an automated check, but by and large, government websites are still more accessible than private sector websites. So among government ministries, 13% were accessible. And here, when we say 13% accessible, the benchmark was slightly higher than the private government sector websites. 47% partly accessible, which clearly shows that if we put accessible and partly accessible together, that shows that the government has been working on it for a longer time than the private sector has. And 40% were not accessible. Ministry, as I said, the only fully accessible website, both on the automated check as well as the manual check, fared very well. So taking on from there, I think this is a huge opportunity, and we must not let this opportunity, let us by, because we have a great opportunity to be able to open up doors of universities, of corporates, and no longer is physical presence an issue for a person to be able to work for you. So people with disabilities can, and that's why I asked Nipun that question, that how do corporates react on enabling jobs, because mostly they have issues with how will the person navigate inside, and so that's not an issue any longer. So I think it's time that we push for digital and online access, because since so much is online, I think it's a huge opportunity for people with disabilities. I will now stop sharing my screen. And what I will do is I will share on the chat box the link for the report. The entire report can be downloaded from that link. We can now open the floor for questions. Danish, would you be fielding? Can you field the questions now, or will can you just take on the floor so that we can?
Yes. So thank you so much, all the speakers, for this beautiful round of collaboration and communication that we got to have from you. It really opened doors to awareness, level of sensitivity, and knowledge. Maybe for me, and also maybe I am hopeful that for all of us. We are having a question answer session as of now, and on the chat screen we have a couple of questions from the participants. We have Mr. Okay. So these are the comments from the people. Ms. Kiran Kaushal says that small videos on the challenges faced by people with disability and along with solutions can help in creating awareness among supporters on the other hand. Probably that is missing, and that's why all funds going towards supporting other social issues. Thank you so much, Ms. Kiran. We have one more comment from Mr. Sanjeev. Rather a question. He asks that why can't our representatives visit a developed nation after proper analysis regarding learning disabled toilets and other infrastructure designs, as they are all very caring? So
I'll answer that.
Yes.
Yeah, if you go through the harmonized guidelines, they give the background to how these guidelines were formulated. They have visited a number of countries, studied a number of infrastructure in various developed countries and then formulated these guidelines. Please go through the harmonized guidelines and look at it, how it's been made. It's very easy to blame the government, but they have done something. It's only implementation of the issue. And it'll take time to refine it further. It's a dynamic process. But they have gone to each and every country, and that's the government is the only agency which can do this and interact with all in the developed nations where the infrastructure is so good for the disabled. For example, Singapore is one of the better ones, even vis-a-vis the US, which I visited all these places. And Singapore, it's really out of this world. Of course, it's a small nation state with a lot of discipline, everything very clean. So really, we can't compare India with that. But they have taken cognizance of the infrastructure in all developed countries for formulating this act as well as making the guidelines.
Sangeeta, I'd like to just add a little bit to that.
Please.
Yeah. Enable Travel actually visited about 24 countries to see how accessible, how they work with access, etc. The criticism wasn't towards the government per se. It's towards not implementing what has been set out. And to implement that, we have to do that. We have to make a noise. It's not going to be done otherwise. Because if you even look up the American, Disabilities Act and all that was set up, but eventually there were people, in their government, disabled people in the government, there were disabled people in the states, in Congress. They're the ones who made it happen. So we have to go further than this, we have to take it further, and it has to come from the public. After all, even the government is from the public.
Most certainly, I think that makes a lot of sense. I have shared the link to the report in the chat box. So those who are interested in having a look at the detailed report are most welcome. And we will, on Learning Guru, will also be doing a session on telling you how to create accessible documents. Not the website, of course. If you make an HTML website, it would more or less turn out to be accessible. And if you use Microsoft tools the way they're supposed to be used, you would have accessible documents. But then I do plan to conduct a free course for creating accessible documents sometime down the line. And if those who are interested may please share their interest.
One very small thing before I go.
Sure.
The only government that has actually listened to the disabled, folk is Goa. I don't know how aware you are of that, but they have made sure a lot of things are accessible. In fact, Goa now is the most accessible destination in India. And after that, Kerala, though Kerala still has a lot of work to be done. But Goa is super. We even had the Goa Carnival. We had an accessible float for the carnival. They're so well equipped. Their hotels, in fact, I was called there to give my advice on a couple of DTDC hotels as well. GTDC, sorry, hotels as well. So that's all it needs. It just needs an interested government. The tourists, the tourists are there. But the government needs to be, interested, and the tourism ministry as such of the state. So that is who we need to aim for.
Yeah, so the government will listen if we make adequate noise.
Exactly.
Nipun, you've heard us all, and looking at the perspective from where you look at it, would you like to add something to the conversations that have been going on?
Yeah. Firstly, Sangeeta, thank you so much for that fantastic report that you've prepared over the last few months during the lockdown. I think it just reinforces the fact that how inaccessible we really are, So, I think the next step in terms of the battle for accessibility is going to be online in that sense. And that's why I think it is so timely, because today during the times of COVID, where the companies are shifting to work from home, persons with disabilities are people who have been talking about work from home for a long time, and it is always thought that nahi ho sakta, you have to come to office to work, etc. And now when the entire world is shifting to work from home, this is a great opportunity for us. But it only becomes an opportunity when the tools that we are given to work from home are accessible. And when most of these websites are inaccessible, when companies use technologies and programs that are inaccessible, persons with disabilities face the same advantage that they were facing with terms of lack of physical infrastructure. So I think thank you, and I look forward to that webinar that you're doing, and I think a lot of HR heads and IT heads of companies also should attend it. So I think that is very timely in that sense. As far as the harmonized guidelines are concerned, I think Captain Madhikar gave a fantastic presentation on them. But to be very honest, I think the guidelines are fantastic. As he said that there's been research all over the world for them, but we shouldn't really be begging governments across the country to ensure that the harmonized guidelines are implemented. This is our right. I mean, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016 actually talks about the fact that any building, when it gets a completion certificate, it should use the harmonized guidelines. But as I said earlier, if none of the states have changed their building bylaws to include the harmonized guidelines, and if bylaws are changed, at least I look at accessibility as two things. One is a stock problem, the stock of existing infrastructure. For example, your existing PVRs, etc., where of course it is a challenge to make things accessible. The other is a flow problem where new infrastructure is being built. And luckily for India, India is still a very developing country. The smart cities mission, etc., have just started. But we cannot look at disability as a stylo, by having just a harmonized guidelines that are totally separate from building bylaws, or an accessible India campaign that is not in sync with the smart city campaign. We need to mainstream all this. I think Sharma mentioned something that they've started something called a VIP. What do you call it? The Viklang?
Viklang Independent Party.
Viklang Independent Party. That is fantastic in that sense that it is creating the right.
You need to join us now.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm always there to align.
Now it's not going to be you, me, and them. It's going to be us.
Of course, but the bigger problem is that why, like in India, every national party, whether it's BJP, it's Congress, it's Aam Aadmi Party, they all have wings for various minorities, whether it's for caste, it's for gender, it's for religion. Why has no mainstream political party in India really started a disability cell, because of which Sharma had to do this? That is shocking in that sense. I think we still do not.
This is Rustam's idea, not mine. I can't take the thing. It was his idea and I backed it up.
Okay, Sharma and Rustam, but I mean, I'm sure you add the glamour to the party in that sense, so you're as important as him to it. But on a more serious note, why is no single party in India looking at disability cell in that sense? And that's something I've been wondering for years. I've written to members of parliament, I've written to across political parties, but and I think whichever is the first national party that does something like that will get a huge first mover advantage in terms of getting together into the mainstream debate. I was watching the Democratic National Convention last week, where Joe Biden was officially nominated as a presidential candidate. And disability was spoken about in such a mainstream way. I don't remember when is the last time in any Lok Sabha election disability was even brought up. I think it was never.
I don't think they even considered it as a vote bank.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it as a separate vote bank.
You'll be shocked to know that in India's census, which records data on disability, till 1931, disability was a question. And after India got independent, that question was removed for 3 or 4 decades, and then it came back. Which
is exactly probably why we are where we are. Otherwise, I'm sure we would have gone much further in terms of at least infrastructure and other things, because the voice hasn't been heard.
You know what?
Absolutely.
If you and Nipun, if you think about it and you read about all these countries, especially I'm looking at USA and the UK, because they were the front runners. And if you see, like, up until the 1980s, there was no access. There was hardly any access. I remember, maybe the late 1970s, because I went to the UK in 1985 and it was quite good then. But before that, it wasn't. It was only after these movements started. I remember watching a video of this guy just going, he had to go and watch a film. So he had to be carried up the pavement, then he had to be carried up the steps. And then it all started. It was with videos like this which actually brought the government's attention. So that is what we need to do, as someone said.
Absolutely. And I think that was a valid point. I've done many of these videos myself. I've seen others do those videos.
Excellent.
But in a country like India, you are at times even called for a session on a panel discussion on accessibility, at a venue which is not accessible.
Yeah.
I've seen those kind of situations too in that sense, So it is very ironic in that sense. And you mentioned UK, you mentioned US. In US, the American Disabilities Act came in 1990. India's first Disabilities Act came in 1995. So India was not too far behind the US in that sense. It was just 5 years later.
Right.
But in terms of implementation of the act, if you look at US and India, I think there's miles of difference in that sense.
Because the people didn't sit at home, Nipun. Most disabled people don't go out. That is why we need to bring them out first. We need to show them the world first. And then
I think we can go on about the fact that people with disabilities are sitting at home in that sense. But to be honest, I think that's a chicken and egg situation. Till you do not have accessible infrastructure, how will they even go out? So, somebody in the TV sector made a list. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's what we have to do, We have to start from the beginning, literally, And for that, we need to make sure there are accessible aids available for them to go out, ramps.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned aids. You'll be shocked to know that in India, disability aids like wheelchairs, hearing aids, braille keypads, when GST was announced, which were earlier tax-free, ended up coming up under the 18% tax regime. And we in the disability sector created a huge protest, brought it down to 5%, but it is still 5%. It should be zero rated. Are we going to be taxed on walking, seeing, or hearing in that sense? So a lot needs to be done in that sense. But I think we'll all be sitting at the evening, and all the participants will vanish within.
Well, I think the participants are enjoying it because they're still here. So
there is a comment from Mr. Sudeep Goel. He says MSJE, Ministry of Social Justice Empowerment, Government of India initially funded all states to get retrofitting in their capitals under AIC. Now they've asked state governments to fund for themselves in the next phases. This has been a dampener. We must advocate for greater allocation for disability sector in union budget, like 6% GDP's share in a new education policy. Sanjeev says, can't the disabled society?
Yeah, Sangeeta, since you brought that, just one figure I want to throw out that in India, the capital outlay on disability is 0.04% of the GDP, whereas India's disabled population is easily 7 to 8%. So he's right.
So clearly, I think the voice is not getting heard. So clearly we need more people like you, Nipun, and we need to strengthen your voice more to be able to make ourselves represented and heard. So,
Sangeeta, united. It's all about being united.
True.
As long as we're all together, believe me, we'll be a force to reckon with.
I'm going to give a punchline for Sharma's new party. We are all VIPs, is what she should call it.
I'll just do a quick time check. Danish, how much time do we have so that we can then see if we can throw up a few more discussions?
We actually have crossed 60 minutes, 65 minutes.
Okay.
And we have another 5 minutes if we can have for question answer session, and then we can start off. We have shared a poll of this as a feedback poll of this particular session, a webinar that we are having currently. You all are requested to please participate in this poll and let us know how you are, how you feel about this webinar by rating it on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest rating.
Guys, give us a 5.
There's one comment from Sanjeev which I've been wanting to read out. Can't the Disability Society, I think he means Disabled Society, privately generate a small team who genuinely work on to expedite things? I opt as a serious member, as I'm already recovering cancer and other critical patients at lowest price. Naturally and basic innovative amendments. Okay, so he's saying a group that starts taking up various issues. So yeah, most welcome, most welcome, Sanjeev. I think there'll be lots of people ready to join you. So anybody else, any of the other speakers want to add something? Please, the floor is yours.
I think Sanjeev made a very good point when he's mentioned how he's suffering, how he's recovering from cancer, and he faces the same accessibility challenges that persons with disabilities perhaps face. And I think that is one more thing that people need to realize, that everybody in this world is really temporary able-bodied in that sense. You can have any disease or any injury because of which you will have similar challenges to persons with disabilities face. And also the fact that once a person turns elderly, and 7 to 8% of India's population as per the last census is elderly in that sense, again there are a lot of accessibility constraints. So when you fight for accessibility, you're not just fighting for persons with disabilities, but I think you're just fighting for a more equitable nation. And these same accessibility challenges can hit anybody at any time. Sorry. Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's something that I've always thought about, because it's just not me or you or someone else who works with crutches. It's anybody. Anybody can be in that state.
And how do we forget that the elderly? I mean, after all, there are elderly folk in every family, and I mean, with the average mortality rate in India going higher, I mean, people are living longer. People have issues with, and arthritis is a common thing. People and end up on wheelchair. That doesn't mean that they stop moving out of their homes. So the feedback is on, guys. Please give us feedback so that we can get more encouragement on doing more of these webinars and conferences, etc., and get more voices heard.
Sangeeta, read Rohan Menezes what he says.
Yeah, Rohan says include this as part of CSR mandate for corporates in addition to their disability advocacy networks.
That is something I've
maybe wants to know, how can I hire ISL interpreters for any events I'm part of? Is there an agency or a company I can contact? There are 2 ISL interpreters right here. Why don't you all share your numbers so that those who want to contact?
Yes, with the permission of Surbhi, I have shared the contact number of Surbhi with the concerned person. Please get in touch with her. Thank you for asking.
Maybe you can give your number in the chat. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So I have shared it privately if to the person.
Group Captain Malakar, any closing comments from anybody? Please, you're most welcome. The floor is open. Before we wind up,
I'd like to just put a little bit in for my company. So if anyone has any accessible or inclusion questions or requirements, please reach out to me. I will ask Danish to share my email with anyone who's interested. And I look forward to much more interaction and definitely a more accessible India.
Danish,
share her email ID, share your email ID in the chat box so that everyone has access to it. Sharma ma'am.
I think it's better that you share it with someone who wants it, Danish. I'd rather not put it there, because it's not, everyone doesn't want to get in touch, right? Yeah.
So there's somebody who's not being able to give feedback, Danish. Could you just look into that?
Yes. So we have received the feedbacks from 22 people have given their feedback.
Sangeeta is not able to give her feedback, she says.
Yes.
I have again shared the link to the report for those who would like to download it. Vivek Quatra says, great learning insights indeed. I wish to know how to bring in the midst, in the mindset for inclusion, because access for me is more about having an inclusive mindset. Please suggest, would anyone want to take that?
Yeah, he can contact me. I'm just putting that.
So he says, he talks about, he's actually thrown up a question. How do you bring in inclusive mindset, Nipun?
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree with him that inclusive attitudes is the biggest challenge that persons with disabilities face. And I think to really create that change, sensitivity really needs to start at the school level. I've in fact written a comic and I do these regular workshops at school where I sensitize children too. Oh, thank you. But on a more regular basis, I think just like we have environmental education and gender education now in schools, we really need to ensure that there's disability education too. And I have in fact personally written to a lot of education boards, tried sensitizing them, etc. Not much has happened in that sense, but I think sensitivity really has to start at the school level, because the faster you sensitize somebody, the bigger the impact is in that sense, I think.
Nipun, where it has to start first? In families. Just like racism and classism. It has to start with our families, like not because they have someone disabled in their family, but just generally it starts from there, goes to school, then goes higher up. And school is a very important place for inclusion. That's
So
for
of course, I mean, families, that change is needed in families too, but I think it will just be easier to implement if you start it
in school
at the
at
school level. Or
100%.
even at a school level, if you have a 6 or 7 year old child who's getting sensitized about disability and they have a family member at home,
Yeah,
if they point out discrimination there, it will be much more effective than some adult
of
pointing
course,
it out.
of course. And then there won't be that, oh, like children stare and they laugh, when they see something that's out of the, usual. So I think it's really good, that it should come from the school level for sure. And we should start doing it. It's something that I've been wanting to do, but most schools are not accessible. So,
Yeah, I quite agree with you guys. School's a great place because I mean, I remember as a kid, at least all my classmates uh, kind of got, but it kind of came very naturally for them, to be able to help me over a rocky path, or just give out their hand to help me over something that looks a little difficult to negotiate. So I'm sure those people grew up with the appropriate sensitization.
yeah.
And even for that matter, now that we are so technology centric, and Nipun was saying HR heads, I would imagine creating documents that are inclusive and creating presentations that are inclusive should become a way with somewhere we need to embed it deeper down. And incidentally, I have shared the report with the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, but nothing's happened on it. But the point is that most certainly, when you bring out something and you put it out there, and especially now that school curriculum is also being made available online. I don't know how children with disabilities must be tackling situation, because it can be such a huge opportunity, and I'm not so sure we are living up to actually creating that space for people with disabilities, or kids with disabilities. So somebody wants, there was issues with the feedback, Danish. I'm just getting the poll results. I'm not getting the...
I was going to ask the same thing. What are you supposed to do? Share results, reach it out?
Yes, I'm resharing the polling once again. At
the end.
Please, yes. Yes, so it's in progress. You can please provide your feedbacks.
No, but it only says feedback in progress is what we get. So I'm not sure this is the... Shall I just share it with you?
Yes, so participants will be getting this thing actually.
Wait.
Yes. So 15 people have responded. So these are the results.
80% have given us 5.
So we are good to go, I think.
Yeah, and thanks a lot to all the participants for taking out time and spending time here. And we will be very, very happy to be available for any further questions you might have. And please propagate the fact that we need to be more accessible in the respective organizations, and among people that you interact with. Thanks a lot. Danish, the floor is over.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful moderation, ma'am. I really thanks all the participants, and of course the speakers are ISL interpreters who have participated very well and contributed in this particular webinar on disabilities, accessibility and inclusion. It really has broadened my vision and has encouraged me to keep doing such webinars on our platform. So for our own learning, and also to provide such opportunities to other participants as well. We have just rolled out our polling to take your feedback on should we end the webinar now. So it is totally based on your opinion. 80%, 82% say that yes, we should end the webinar now. I request our esteemed speakers if they can close this particular webinar by having their closing remarks, or or they can use their conclusion, their takeaways from this particular webinar. The last, takeaway for all of us. So I request Mr. Nipun Malhotra, Nipun,
Yeah, sorry.
yes, and Ms. Shama Nurani, Prabal
Nipun?
Malakar sir, or Sangeeta Robinson to give us the closing remarks, and that will be our takeaway from this webinar. And then we will end this particular discussion.
Sure. So, like I was saying, I think a collaborative approach will give us the results that we actually all aspire to have, and let it not just be people with disabilities who speak up. I think we need to have champions among people who don't have disabilities and are not affected directly with disabilities, but know that we need to have a level playing field. And I think we need to just keep building more champions and more louder voices in making accessibility a reality. Thank you.
I would say get involved at whatever level. In a very small way, you don't have to go into big time, but every little way you can help out, get involved, spread the message, get in touch with the stakeholders, and I'm sure things will work out. It takes time. The whole country has to be sensitized to disability. That will take maybe decades. It didn't happen overnight abroad also. But we have also multifarious other problems like population, poverty. People are looking for roti, kapra, and makan. The last thing on their mind is disability. So let's hope that things get better, people get more sensitized, and you can get involved in their own little way. Thank you. Excellent presentation. Thanks to Danish and
Thank you so much, sir.
other speakers.
Thanks to all the speakers and participants for participating in this webinar. We shall end the webinar now. Thank you so much.